we have the opportunity to rebuild the entire internet on top of Nostr.
The goal is to have the entire podcasting industry adopt Nostr.
Eventually, I'm confident that everything will move over to Nostr.
There's far more use cases than we could conceive of.
You invent something, my shit gets better. I invent something, your shit gets better. That is insane.
The addressable market is basically the whole world.
This is the thing that we're going to use to take down big tech and these centralized institutions. This is it.
Nostr is rising. For those who haven't listened to Bitcoin.review before, I'm NVK. I run CoinKite, where we've been making Bitcoin security products and fund devices since the very early days of Bitcoin. Nostr is a new protocol, and like any new technology, it's very hard for people to understand the why, the what, and the how. We are going to be talking to the people who actually build the things and try to explain to people what and why we're doing this. The show is not sponsored. We are supported by your Zaps and my company CoinKite. You can follow all the Nostr Rising episodes on nostrrising.com. Thank you so much for the support.
Hello, and welcome back to the Bitcoin.review Nostr Rising series. We are doing a series of episodes on different topics of Nostr. This will be released in an order that will come up later. We're sort of like working this as we go. Nostr is skilling out there. We figured we bring some of the best people who are building the coolest things that are seeing adoption on the space to talk about the things that are in everybody's mind. So today with me, I have Mr. JB55. Hello, sir.
Yo, how's it going?
Nice to have you. Mr. Hodlbod.
Good morning, Nostr.
Mr. Miljan.
Hey, everybody. Good to be with you.
For the people that don't know, Hodlbod is building Coracle. Very cool client. JB is building Damos. Another very cool client. Miljan is building Primal. Awesome client too. So we have people here who have users. So their opinions are important because they're going to build the things their users are going to see. So starting with that, today's episode is Permissionless Algos. We wanted to sort of like approach this topic because, you know, it's front, right, and center, especially with Jack bringing this up all the time, you know, the free speech versus free will and all that stuff. Why don't we start a little bit talking about the current landscape of algos? Like, what is an algo?
Everything's an algo. A chronological feed of your follows, post by your follows, is an algo, right?
So, you know, when folks that are steeped in this very deep talk about algos, we're talking about like, you know, what's on my feed, right? So when you open Nostr or when you open the Bird app, what shows there, right? Like, I mean, like you start scrolling and you just assume that like, you know, stuff is from the people you follow. And it's not quite like that, right? There are very complex algorithms behind that feed that push onto your face what you're seeing. And, you know, as we see in the legacy social media space, a lot of that causes, you know, strife, causes division. You know, it removes a lot of your agency because you're seeing things that, you know, you're not necessarily even interested, but like they force you to have an emotion, right? And with that emotion, they drive more activity. And that activity creates more clicks and more eyeballs. And that is how they get more people to have these interactions for advertisers so that the advertisers can pay them more money, right? Like right now, that's sort of like the main way in which legacy social media sort of works, right? Like in a nutshell. Would you guys sort of like agree with that? Is there anything else we should add to the legacy algos?
Yeah, so like an algorithm is a how to the what, right? The content is the what, and you're trying to get to the content that's relevant for you, for whatever like subjective measure you have for that. And centralized legacy social media platforms are really good at delivering not only the what that you're looking for, but the what that they want you to be looking for. And so, yeah, they spoon feed it to you. It used to be that the algorithm was very simple and a lot more satisfying, but they've actually found through a whole lot of engineering effort the exact balance of, you know, stuff that they make money off of or stuff that the deep state incentivizes them to put in front of your eyeballs. The exact balance to mix that with things that you actually want to engage with to keep you there. But you become the product because you become the propagandee and or the person whose attention is being sold to advertisers.
It's almost like a Laffer curve for for attention span, like people that don't know the Laffer curve, that's for taxes, but I highly recommend that. Just imagine that curve, but for your like enragement and your stickiness on each side. And the middle there is where they make the most amount of money without you leaving.
Yeah, and I think a big part of, algorithms is just, and I'm starting to know this as well, you get more and more users, and users are just like, I don't see anything interesting. I don't have any interesting content. So I think algorithms kind of started from an innocent perspective of just trying to show users more interesting content. So initially it was just very simple. You'd follow people and get their content from that. But a lot of people are just like too lazy to even do that. And they just want to be shown stuff. So TikTok's a perfect example of this. It's like, you don't have to do anything. You just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, and it will learn your preference. It learns what you want to see. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it gets kind of bad when those algorithms are manipulating you and showing you just hateful content and making you angry, making you sad. And we're trying to this is why the marketplace of algorithms is going to become very important, which I'm sure we'll talk about, where you get to choose your own algorithm instead of just having one shoved down your throat.
Right.
Yeah, it's been really refreshing going back to the chronological algorithm on Nostr, but there are some serious specific problems with it. Like one is time zone. I never see anything for people who are in Europe. And then the other is frequency of posting.
You're not missing anything.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I love our Europeans.
The other thing is frequency of posting. There's people I follow who post 100 times a day, and then people that I follow who post once a week. I'd really like to see the once a weekers every time they post. And, it's okay if a couple of those other ones get lost.
Miljan, how do we approach this complexity? Because we have all these different kinds of preferences, right? Like the people who I follow is one weight, right? Like the chronology is another weight. The frequency of posting is another weight. The people I don't follow, but may be in part of topics I'm interested in, is another weight, right? Like what is trending is another weight. There is a million different weights, right? And on Twitter, there's a single solution, right? That I'm sure it's extremely dynamic on how they approach that between the user preferences, but they kind of just have one option, right? You can select, it's what you open, that's what it shows. And, you can still select, I think, only stuff from the people I'm following, but they still shove ads and other crap in it. So, Miljan, on your perspective, where do we go and how do we solve some of these problems?
So yeah, all of those problems that you outlined with legacy social media are correct. I agree with all of that. Probably the biggest problem is lack of choice. In all of these legacy networks, you get one algorithm. So maybe Twitter, you get your follows and then the For You. But every one of these social networks, as far as I know, has one algorithm. It's a kind of a take it or leave it proposition. And that one algorithm is not optimized for our well-being, as you guys outlined. It's optimized for advertisers, for the social media company to make money. So I think the first thing we need to do on Nostr is offer choice. And that already exists at some scale. I was actually surprised a few weeks ago when I was researching this to see that we already have a feed marketplace on Nostr. If you go to noogle.lol/discover, there are a whole bunch of feeds there that were published using DVMs. And there are already clients like Amethyst or Nostrudel that integrate those feeds. So early days, but something like this already exists on Nostr, and we can lean into it and kind of build a much more vibrant and kind of all-encompassing ecosystem there. As far as how we want to approach it from Primal, at Primal we do two things. We build client apps, but we also build and run services for Nostr. So as a part of our upcoming 2.0 release, we're going to create a whole bunch of new feeds, which we're going to expose as DVMs. And we're going to make sure that all Primal clients can interoperate with third-party feeds. So anything that shows up on the feed marketplace will be accessible on Primal. And all Primal feeds are going to be available on the feed marketplace for any other client to kind of plug into. So I think once kind of this takes some hold and more market participants show up, I think it will blow up. I think the most interesting feeds are not going to be created by Primal or some, kind of centralized actor like that. It's the long tail that will give people like a ton of choice, and we'll get like blown away by the types of feeds that people are creating, especially if it's actually implemented as a marketplace where you can monetize some of these feeds, which I'm optimistic that, people will be able to do. And that becomes a massive selling point for Nostr. It becomes one of those things where Nostr becomes so obviously different from all the other networks.
So marketplace.
No, not just marketplace, but this kind of like massive choice that you have. Like it's a kind of testament to the openness of the network, where you can very easily kind of draw a distinction between Nostr and the legacy web. Like there is no feed marketplace on X, or even Blue Sky. You guys are open, but where is your feed marketplace?
I mean, Blue Sky is not open. It's all a scam.
It really is.
And now we can show it because they don't have a feed marketplace. Yeah,
They can read your DMs, for God's sake. Like, come on.
I did not know that. I saw that this morning too. That's crazy.
Oh, I guess they are open then.
Yeah.
Radically open, yeah.
Guys, on the AI space, if you're into like generating images and stuff, there is marketplaces for weights, right? So people share for free or charge for people to use their weights. So if you want to make your weird anime stuff, somebody put in a lot of work to create those weights, right? And it's not too dissimilar, right? Like the weights idea is essentially how these algos work.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be very interesting because, Primal, Corkle, Amethyst, I don't know if Corkle might be doing this, might be doing the DVM stuff. I think you guys are, right? But they're all going the DVM route. But Damus has always been a radically like client-only approach for a lot of things. And DVMs are very much like other people are generating feeds for you and you're kind of consuming them because it's just like data on the network. The approach that Damus is taking is that I'm trying to build a sandbox, kind of like JavaScript in the browser, where you can like run code that's like sandboxed, and then it gives different presentations of the local data. And this is going to be a radically different approach to algorithms where you can share these small like WASM, it's called WebAssembly, like blobs of text, and then you can run those locally and you can run them offline and things like that. And then it's much more private. And so I think there's going to be many different approaches where you can share like you have the DVM approach, you have the Nostr script approach. But this is exciting. This is the greatest thing about Nostr is that we're going to try these different methods, and maybe the Nostr script is not going to be that variety compared to the DVMs. But yeah, Damus is definitely going for the more client focus. So we don't build relays, we don't build like web services. It's only just a client. So
I love what you're doing, by the way, Will. I think there's a lot of merit in, for the types of things that can be done locally on the client, to do them locally on the client. There are all kinds of benefits to that. Like, exactly which code is running there. You have the data, so it could be performant, etc., etc. So I think that has legs, and like I said, there's a lot of merit there. But also there are other types of algos that require kind of a wider view of the network, which you're not likely to have on the client. And like you said, we'll do it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about choice, right? Like this is what Nostr is voluntary, just like Bitcoin. It's voluntary. Like you have choice and you don't need permission. It's a very, very foreign concept for social media. Right? Like in social media, like, we have had benevolent systems before, right? Like, for example, early days of Twitter, you could plug into the API and do all kinds of cool stuff, right? But that was very benevolent because you needed permission. And then they killed that permission and then you couldn't do it anymore, right? So we've learned through this decade that, like, you just simply cannot have a protocol that is closed. We don't care if clients are closed or open, if relays are closed or open. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is, like, does everybody participate in the same open graph? And the bad actors that don't, then, like, they essentially just exclude themselves, right? It's the incentives are perfect. Hodlbod, I know you have a lot of opinions about DVMs, Nostr scripts, and like the whole space of the algo. So, like, I'd love to hear them.
I have so many opinions, too many opinions. But I did want to just say, like, DVMs and Nostr script are not incompatible approaches. They're different approaches, but they can also be combined. You could do crazy things like run a client-side DVM. So, JB55's note deck could run a DVM server on his client that would then feed a DVM-based feed in Primal, right? So you could do all kinds of weird things, and Nostr script, of course, works on the server, so it could be used to build DVMs as well. So, it's not just like which one of these solutions is going to win. How can we compose these in really interesting and useful ways downstream? And that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. So I've been a advocate of DVMs for a long time. Coracle's custom feeds were based on lists for a long time. And that allowed Coracle to build the filters that were entirely client-side and then send them to the correct relays. So it's kind of a client-side solution, but lazy loading data so that I don't have to download the entire network before I can execute my feed. And a couple months ago, I put out a new spec that does basically the same thing, but a little bit more sophisticated. So, it's this custom feeds thing where you can compose lists and regular filter elements. You can add, you can pull in your web of trust or your follow graph. You can link in DVMs. You can link in other people's lists. And you can compose all these things using set operations, which is basically, I want everything from all of these, or I want everything that's in all of these. Those sound different, but or versus and, basically. And that all compiles down to filters, which every relay supports. So you don't need any special backends necessarily. I think the reason that DVMs have been a winner for so long is that they're content addressable. This is something that Pablo understood. They're not just opaque services behind a URL. They actually have an event that says, this is my name, this is my description, this is who runs me, this is where you can get in contact with it. And so you can pass around these DVM, identifiers or feeds. And so you can embed that in a note and you get a little card that says, this is a DVM. Do you want to open that feed? And so the content addressability is the huge thing. And custom feeds are content addressable too. And you can pull the DVMs in, but then compose them with other things. And the cool thing about that is that you don't have to run a server or a DVM host in order to create a custom feed. You can just open up Coracle today, add some filters, put some DVMs together, add a list in there, and then you can save it and publish it. In fact, this morning while I was waiting for the podcast to start, there's this trending bot that someone made that just reposts trending notes that it identifies. And in 30 seconds, I turned that into a custom feed in Coracle and then published it. So I didn't have to set up any hardware or anything like that. I also didn't have to download a whole bunch of the network to make it happen. So we've got 3 different teams, but I think, we're all building interesting things that are compatible, and the final solution is not really a merge.
I think the composability aspect is really important because the way that I view it is I see it as Nostr scripts as one of the ways to generate an output, right? And the DVMs are kind of like the output of an algorithm. It's like the result of an algorithm. And Nostr script is the algorithm, but there might be other ways to share these algorithms that generate these feeds. So yeah, exactly. They're not versus each other. They're all ways of working together, and it's all composable. So it's kind of cool.
I think this is where we diverge from Bitcoin. These are all Bitcoiners here. In Bitcoin, there is only one true source of truth, right? And you cannot deviate from the SPAC a millimeter or you fall off consensus, right? What's remarkable about Nostr is that because this is not money, we don't care about a master consensus, right? We don't care about single source of truth. It's the complete opposite in that sense. We want multiple sources of truth. And as long as everybody remains somewhat in consensus with the SPAC, everything is interoperable, right? But not everything needs to be interoperable either. It's a super cool thing. It's okay if clients have different features that don't necessarily use the same SPAC. As long as, at least in my view, each client has a little Balkan group of other clients that support a similar SPAC, so that you still have some mobility, right? We can never kill the mobility in Nostr because that kills Nostr. At least my opinion.
And this is why Nostr is so much more fun than hacking on Bitcoin. Hacking on Bitcoin is pure torture. It's if you try to submit any code to Bitcoin, you'll be waiting for 4 years to get your PR to merge.
Mm-hmm.
With Nostr, it's you just go off and do your own thing. And I think people kind of get over obsessed about making it compatible right from the start.
Yes.
Because a lot of the time when you're building something new, you don't know if it's the best idea. It's kind of you're experimenting. So I think that's a big flaw when your first time when you're hacking on Nostr stuff is oh, I need to make it a init before I can continue working on it. It's no, just build it and see if it works. And if other people agree with you, you end up building, like you said, a group of people who agree and and all kind of reaffirms this idea, and then you make it a nip. That's why we have this rule in the nips repo where it's we make sure we have 2 or 3 implementations before we nip it, because it could just be a bad idea if no one's implementing it, right?
Yeah, and these things can be bridged together too. So like, my version of custom feeds is a different thing from DVMs. They're advertised in similar ways. But what you could do, you could very easily run a DVM server that pulls down all Coracle custom feeds in the network and then republishes those as DVMs. And then those are visible in Primal's client. And then that one DVM interprets the Coracle feeds as DVMs. Same thing with Nostr script,
I think people listening to this would be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah, I know.
What is going on?
I think it's like good to nerd out a bit, but
I think we need to be self-reflective sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what you're saying, but like, damn, like that. No, that's very confusing.
No, I have no filter. I have a real problem with this.
I think it's nice to go like from 100,000 foot view, which is a user view, all the way down to a little bit of the spec and some of the dynamics there. But like you can't ever ask a user, right? Like, what do you want? That's the wrong way of approaching any kind of product, software, or service, right? Because the user doesn't know what he wants or like doesn't know what's possible, right? So the better question is like, it's sort of like, what problems do you have, right? What are your aspirations in terms of like, what do you want to achieve, right? And then we go and we engineer out like how to do that, right? In hopefully novel ways that are like even more interesting than what's possible now. So, yesterday I was asking on Nostr, like, what are some of the issues that you have, right? Like, and you know what? Like, I was very surprised by like how little things were. And it were like things that we already know, sort of like, my feed is kind of empty when I start, or, who are all these Bitcoiners, or, it was really like along those lines. Like there was nothing really that I found to be notable that wasn't along those lines. And I think once you guys start onboarding customers with many options of feeds, and you can't just present a bunch of options to users either. Like that's UX suicide, right? Like people don't know what they want. So, maybe you ask them like, what topics you're interested in, like, boom, that's like, you're not even following anyone, but boom, you already have like a very cool feed that seems like it gives you a lot of like value already, right? And that becomes a much better experience. How are you guys approaching this first time user experience without getting too much into the weeds? Miljan.
Oh, it's very early days, I think, for all of this. So we started off with, as you kind of get onboarded, you create your account, and then we used to present the list of kind of recommended follows that you can select to kind of opt into. Not too sophisticated at all, and it's kind of like there's friction there because now like you're kind of scrolling through a list of profiles while trying to kind of get onboarded. So we upgraded that a little bit by doing exactly what you just mentioned a minute ago, which is like, tell us which interests you have, and you kind of tap a few times. You say, maybe economics, philosophy, Bitcoin or not. And then based on that, we have recommended follows for each of the categories. But that's not great either. It's maybe a little bit of a better UX as you are signing up, but then people go, well, why am I following all these people? I never wanted to follow them. Like, so we kind of have these follow packs that we put together, as best we could, and these are kind of quickly running out of date. What would be cool and what we would like to do at some point soon is have a better understanding of the notes that are being published on Nostr and kind of tag them somehow, whether they belong into certain categories, and then have the capability to do what you suggested a second ago, which is you've selected some interest. Here's your feed. You're not following anyone, but we kind of, based on those selections, can provide a meaningful feed. And then on top of that, you can follow people, and that could be included in your feed as well.
It is kind of an interesting bit of a tangent there. Like, I don't think this concept of not following anyone ever sort of like got really thought through, because like social media sort of came from Friendster, and like following was the only way to create the social graph, right?
It's still important for our web of trust, right?
I know, but it is kind of cool to have like almost like follow less content consumption, right? Like, I mean, especially when you get into like long form stuff, which we're going to have an episode about, when you get into, like other uses of Nostr that you don't necessarily want to follow people. I mean, I don't know. It's just an interesting sort of like nugget there. JB, how are you dealing with the first time UX?
Badly. But we do the same thing that like the very bare minimum that all the other clients do, which is we show some recommended hard-coded follow. We don't auto-follow anyone. We just like, hey, here's people you can follow. But I honestly think this is a way easier problem than a lot of people are thinking about right now. And I realize it's more of like a visualization problem. So for instance, if you took every contact list that's like on the network and you just simply clustered all the people who follow each other and you just visualize that, it's actually, people naturally form into clusters of people they're interested in. So when you're talking about like a follow list infrastructure, what we're really saying is that we want to be able to circle those clusters and just say like, follow all the nodes that are happening in that cluster, or circle that cluster and say, I want to make that my contact list. I want to jump into that web of trust. So like, this is what I'm kind of moving toward in Damus, where it's like, you can just visualize almost like a 2D landscape of the entire network. And then you can just jump into different areas. So maybe there'll be like a visualize. I mean, the cool example of that is like a visualization where it's like a map where you can kind of join different clusters, or you simply, maybe it'll automatically find those clusters and put them into like topical groups that you can join. I don't know. That's the way I've been thinking about it.
Hodo.
Yeah, I think those are both great. I think Primal's headed really in the right direction. Coracle does a very similar thing. I curate my own mapping of categories to people. So, it might be like Bitcoin, Christianity, design, art, whatever. And then you click on that and it opens up a list of follows and you can individually follow them or follow all. Pretty standard stuff. I think what Miljan said is really good. And then what I would add to that is like, ultimately, I'd like to crowdsource those mappings. So, anyone can create a list and name it. So those lists are already out there. We just have to find the good ones to surface. And then you can just pull all those lists in and then the user can search for whatever they are interested in. There's still probably some curation that has to be done so that you don't get lists with one item or lists that are a whole bunch of duplicately named lists or something like that. And actually, Coracle kind of works that way already. I just haven't found a lot of good onboarding lists. What I do is I actually just have a list of list addresses, and then that makes the onboarding process. So it's as easy as like updating a list to update my onboarding process.
Yeah. One of the most annoying things that I find with the follow stuff is that like, once you follow people, they get lost in your list and then they change their name or change their picture. And that's true on Bird app as well. And then it becomes like sort of like this noise. They're like, maybe the person that died, they never posted anymore. And it's like, it's very hard to clean up. I'm an inbox zero kind of person, like the OCD kind of goes that way, with some things like that. I want it neat and tight. So, for example, I'd love to, like, if I follow somebody through a list, I don't want to lose that relationship because, like, I also want to be able to unfollow that list or go look at that list and sort of like, oh, maybe I don't want some of these people, or maybe I don't want the superposition of two lists. Like, whoever crosses this two, unfollow, or whoever is an addition of this two, maybe follow into a new list, which is like the Venn of those two. I don't know, like. But all these things that I'm talking about are like great for us that are, advanced users who are into nerding out about the actual tool. But, 99.9999% of the people in the world couldn't care less about any of this stuff. All they want is, they don't even want freedom, right? Like freedom is not in the list of things they want. And that's one of the reasons they want convenience, right? And they fall too easy to the engagement algos that we have out there. And that's why we're in the shit show worldwide that we're in. But the thing then goes is like, I was talking about this, like, how do we covertly give people freedom? I find it's like a much better way. They're like, you can't sell freedom. If you put freedom, it's like, my app -freedom on the app store is going to probably get less downloads. I think it's like what you want to sell to people is what they want to buy, right?
Well, it's because a lot of the time freedom is a grift. You look at other freedom-oriented things, and they're not free at all. It's a branding thing, and people see through that super quickly. So, yeah.
I think ultimately Nostr wins because we'll have much better content and much cooler apps because of how open the network is. All of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of an algo marketplace, a feed marketplace, that's really going to blow up And as more people join the network, there will be higher quality content that's there, that just exists. And then it will be easier to find because of all of these capabilities that we're building. And then because of how composable all of the artifacts of Nostr apps are, where you can have all of the different types of apps creating all different kinds of artifacts, you'll end up with a new breed of apps that combine these artifacts in new ways that are not possible on any other network. So I think those normies who are not really interested in freedom, they just want cool stuff. They want cool content and cool apps. That's how we'll end up winning.
A big part of this is like content creators. So I was talking to a bunch of content creators, like some big ones, and they said like, well, I can't really use Nostr because, there's no algorithm that I can game, because a big part of their business is just like growth hacking the algorithm, figuring out like the little ins and outs of the algorithm and getting on top of everyone else. But I think the long term of Nostr is like, it's going to be better than centralized algorithms because you can go viral in 20 different ways and like in different parts of the world at different times. So I think the virality nature of Nostr could be much larger than the existing networks.
You also own your identity. And I think like that can't be understated for creators, right? Because creators are only famous at the permission of the platforms they're in, right? Like as soon as they say something that they shouldn't, boom, they're out, right? Or this platforms take a huge cut, right, of what they're doing. Or, for example, like I have a competitor that bought the keyword on my on literally my username. So like every time I tweet anything, like their ads show up below mine, right? Like, but the thing is, like, you have this black box, right, of where the stuff is on these platforms, and you can't build around it. You can't find alternatives. You can't fix the problem yourself, right? Like, which a lot of these people who game algos, like, they're very good at fixing the problem themselves, right? Like the problem that they have is getting more eyeballs. And I think this is it's gonna improve a lot, especially once we start having the other modes, right? Like of Nostr. So for example, Nostr markets, right? So on Amazon, if you want to list your product, first of all, they take a huge cut. The second thing is, if you don't do Amazon ads, your product gets completely like disappears and is a full black box. So like you don't know what they're giving the money for, and like you don't know anything. You're just at their mercy, right? You just know you're spending a lot of money to sell your product. So in the near future, you're gonna have like, I don't know, like a musician, right? Like, and he like puts out his music or clips of it when he's building up the, how the rappers do it. They start putting like little teasers, right, of what they're gonna release later, and then like that's kind of mixed in with like swag that he's selling on some Nostr market, right? And that's also mixed in with like zaps that he's getting for his content, right? And then that's also mixed in with like the place where his music gets released, the actual view count of that, right? And then you're going to have Nostr-based like real, I don't know, like radio stations, or on Tidal, maybe you have like stations that like are Nostr feeds, right? It's going to be very hard for any centralized platform to compete with a social graph that's like an octopus permeates into like everything, right? It's like the good version of the NSA logo.
Yeah. It's like if the World Wide Web had like network effects.
Exactly.
And that's like going to be very hard to deal with from centralized, siloed,
Back in the day, you'd list, other BBSs on your BBS. And that's how people found things to go find. Like discoverability has always been hard, right? And then on GeoCities, you'd have a list of other websites you like. And that's how people sort of like found it. And then we got Alta Vista, which was just a gigantic index based on categories, right? And then we got like more like a fuzzy search, right, with Yahoo. And these things just keep on sort of improving that way. But they never had a true cryptographically verifiable and cryptographically protected relationship.
Well, the social graph wasn't part of the protocol.
Exactly. So, you guys are talking, we're talking about these algos, in relation to sort of short notes and like larger notes. But like when this thing expands into all kinds of shit, I think things get crazy. Are we seeing things that are not necessarily just the social media part start to take advantage of some of this open graph?
Yeah, well, you definitely see the integration into Bitcoin wallets. I think that is a super powerful thing. Venmo has to own the social graph in order to do what they do. But, Mutiny added Nostr support so that, you could find your people and then send them payments. So that's one that comes to mind. I know the Cashew Mint discovery stuff is using the social graph as well.
Oh, that's right.
Fountain.
It's happening. It's happening, gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have an episode about 2.0, about Pod 2.0, but like it can't be understated what a monumental sort of like event that was. Like, I think this is the first case study of a existing app that has its own social graph. It's all closed, right? With a lot of users, sort of like goes cold turkey and migrates the whole user base to Nostr and all the events to Nostr, right? Like with graceful degradation so that the people who did not create a new key or whatever can still exist in their closed environment and slowly push them in. I mean, it changed everything. I was not super excited about Pod 2.0 before. I tried it. I was kind of like, yeah, it's cool and all, but it's like another sort of walled garden. And then, like lightning messaging is horrible. The boosts were based on that.
Yeah.
And then like, wow. It's like, they switched it. It's like you push a button, everything is awesome. Like the feed on the pod, and we have a tiny pod, right? So like we have some interactions that are very good with the users, and it's so cool to see them there. And then we can repost their comments on our feed. Like, like it's not just like an email to us saying I like the pod or I hate the pod or whatever, right? Like, and then people pile on, and soon they're going to have the clips that are going to be on Nostr events, right? And as we open up all these things, like it's hard not to be excited.
And a lot of the times, like the users who are like, the users who are pressuring them too. It's like, and like that's why I'm like, when Stacker News, Koob, like, come on.
I refuse to participate in another walled garden place where I don't own my content, don't own my identity, right? Like, it's like, it's very hard to go back once you're Nostr, right?
Totally.
It has that same vibe as Bitcoin. Like, once you do it and you understand, like, very deeply what that true permissionless experience is like you can't go back, right? I think once we 10x the user count, the daily actives on Nostr, I think it's going to be very easy to quit Twitter. Like it's going to be a no-brainer sort of like, just fuck it. Maybe you still have it. You mirror post on Twitter.
That's the right direction. Yeah,
exactly. Right. I think we're going to get there very soon. And, adoption comes in waves. And I think a lot of people are just mentally not prepared for the lulls, for the bears. But as people do cycles, they harden up a little bit.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to bring up, I don't know if you had this on your list, but bots, I think, are a big part of making this happen. Like Jack Dorsey's vision for Twitter early on was that it be an open platform. And, a lot of the third-party developers created things that define Twitter today. Like, I think @mentions and hashtags were invented by third-party developers. So, like, having an open ecosystem that allows people to experiment and bring things in, not just in terms of new standards, but in terms of like infrastructure or clients or whatever, the fact that other people can build DVMs. And we haven't yet talked about the fourth custom feed that is represented in this conversation, which is unleash.chat, right? Unleash downloads a whole bunch of Nostr and then makes it accessible through an LLM interface. That's a custom feed. It's not integrated into any clients unless you call Unleash the client. But Will's idea about identifying clusters, social clusters within the network, that's pretty analysis heavy. You could write a program that does that analysis and then materializes that on Nostr as lists or feeds or whatever it might be. And then clients can pull that into their onboarding workflow. So you have this like opportunity to outsource a lot of the complexity to bots, whether LLMs or whether they're handcrafted, in order to accentuate and accelerate like the onboarding or discovery or moderation or whatever sort of thing you want to pull into your experience.
It's kind of interesting, right? Like Unleash is kind of weird because it's like it's a full Nostr client. It's just it's not the Nostr client that people understand to be a Nostr client, right? Like we're indexing like the majority of the accounts that are, of some amount of followers because it's impossible to index everything. And the LLM needs an index, right? Like that's just how it works. You can't just, do on demand. And there is DVMs. There is lightning payment of the DVMs. It's all there, and because it's private, I have absolutely no idea if people are using it, how they're using it, and if they're using it. So like, it's a very frustrating thing not to have visibility over the thing, but it kind of proves that the thing is private. So if anything, I'd love to hear, like, maybe, I don't know if this is the episode, but like, I want to hear like what people are using it for and how they're using it so that we can build more. Because I found that just simply asking, what's trending today to be a very difficult problem unless you have all the data for the LLM to be context oriented. Otherwise, it's like the DVM model for other things is more sort of like on par to the current capabilities.
I just want to mention something you just said, which is, most of our clients don't track you. So this might be different from your regular experience. So, I'll notice a lot of the time a user will just join and leave because they're unhappy with something, and I just never get the feedback. And I learned about it like a year later. It's like, well, I tried it like a year ago and it didn't do this. And I could have just told them at that point, like, no, but you have that. You just click this button. So yeah, if you're a user, just don't be afraid to give feedback because we're not tracking you, and feedback is the only way we can improve our products. So
we literally added a button called report, and you can report anonymously, and then we give you all it's like, yes, you're going to be sending this chat to us so that we can understand what's going on. But it's a difficult problem, and we're going to find this a lot with the theme of this episode, which is the permissionless algos, is that because it's permissionless, because it's more private, it's going to be hard to iterate without the feedback loop, without having analytics, without having, all the things. So like, we really depend on the users to tell us, like, what are the problems and what you were trying to achieve. There's nothing more annoying to dev than like a user saying like, you should do this. It should be more like, this is the problem I have. This is where I want to go. Please engineer something for me, right? That is the ultimate feedback to a person building a product. And I really like this idea that it's like we don't have users, we have consumers, because they are consuming. They're consuming, and it's a shame that these words have bad meanings nowadays, but it's a much better thing. Like, they're not using your app, they're your customer, and they're the customer of this feed. And I think like as we expand this to a third order, like a second order, like for example, users creating the feeds, creating the algos, and then making them available, this relationship of a customer it's a lot more interesting.
So this is an interesting segue because Hodlbod mentioned bots and whatnot. How much are I don't think we've seen this a lot in traditional or legacy social media. This idea of maybe algos extend to like AI agents on the network. Like, imagine if you can just ask an AI agent to create a feed for me, or maybe algo is going to expand. The concept of an algo is going to expand into intelligent agents that you interact with, and that's like an interesting concept that we're just beginning to explore.
It's kind of doable already.
Well, that's kind of what you're doing a little bit with Unleashed MVK, right?
Yeah.
So Unleashed, because like it's like there is no breaks aside from the original sort of like a training of the Mistral model that we have available for Nostr. If you ask it to like go do something for me, the problem is, I think if you give it a link, because you can search the web. So if you give it a link, say like, this is how you build a DVM link, you will understand, and then it will reply to you with something. I don't know the quality of that something yet, but like totally worth exploring. And then you have to execute that.
Once you have lots of training data on existing, algorithms,
Yep.
Existing DVMs, different approaches. Like, I've been able to give like just entire NIP to ChatGPT, and it can give me an implementation of that NIP, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it really is quite amazing. I think there is nothing wrong with outsourcing all these things to the bots. The bots are trained on us, right? Like, this is the part that is magical about it, right? Like, all these AI models are like, they're literally like, everything that they know is what we know, and they don't really know anything. They just assume things, right? Like, they're bullshit machines. It's just that they have like a 99.9% accuracy.
Humans are bullshit machines too, though.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, putting bots into algorithms really puts the bots in their place, right? Like,
yes.
We don't need more bot-created content. That stuff is cancer, and it also is going to probably cause like waveform collapse, where bots will get dumber because they're ingesting their own content because it's not labeled correctly. Like, there's plenty of content out there. People produce tons of content, just like you were just saying, and using bots to discover that instead of like just pump a whole bunch more noise into things. That's a future with bots in it that I'm actually excited about.
I don't think people are interested in bot created content. It's like right now it's still novel, it's all new, whatever. But like, humans want the imperfection. Like that's the fun of it. That's the fun of art. Because, like there's a painting. Like the whole point of it is because the guy holds the brush in a certain way, right? Like, and it creates a certain style, right? Like as soon as you can replicate and like, it kind of like loses the fun. It loses the interest, right?
You see that on YouTube now. It's like you open up a YouTube video and it's like, wait, this whole thing is just AI generated. The voice, the script, the video. And it's like,
horrible.
I instantly click away. I'm like, I just feel like I've just been assaulted or something. It just feels wrong.
You see that for a lot of product reviews. It's like, here's the 10, and with a Chinese accent in English. It's hilarious. Yeah. So like, here are the 10 products for ham radio. Yeah. Anyways, I think we're going in a very interesting direction. I think things are super, super optimistic. I think we're optimistic indexed now because we have a permissionless tool. You guys are building like the future we want to see. I think that's a killer there. Any final thoughts, Mr. Miljan?
Okay, so I think for many people, the initial aha moment of Nostr was kind of taking their private key from one client and plugging it into another client. Kind of, you pick up your NSEC, from Primal, and you put it into Damos, and all your stuff is there. Eliminated the whole idea of, holy smokes, this I'm sovereign on this network and independent of a specific client or service. I think the next aha moment for a lot of people might be this feed marketplace, where they're going to see something very tangible, very usable. It's a content discovery that exists on Nostr and it doesn't exist on other networks. And it precisely exists on Nostr because Nostr is so open. And we'll see more and more of these aha moments, like the one you mentioned with Fountain, which is insane. They integrated Nostr, it made Fountain much better, and it made Nostr much better. So yeah, I'm super bullish on all of this. Can't wait to see it all play out. I'm a little bit impatient. That's why I work all day long on this.
Hodlbod.
Yeah, I mean, I would just repeat the sentiment. It's this open network has all these emergent properties that introduce really beautiful complexity. I'm not talking unnecessary complexity. I'm talking like Mandelbrot set complexity. And the thing that makes that possible is people creating their own content or using bots to curate it or whatever. And so like a call to action for anyone out there, I hear often, how can I help grow Nostr? And, one thing you can do is contribute to these things, whether you're curating a list, a really high quality list of people in a particular social cluster, also reach out to client developers and let them know to add that to their onboarding or something. Like the list curation is not something that I am very good at. So Coracle at least could use better lists and, write bots, build feeds, like put this curation content out there as well as the content itself.
JB.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that, this is it. This is the thing that we're going to use to take down, big tech and these centralized institutions. It's the largest scale experiment that's ever been done. The amount of support, the amount of people working, the amount of devs in the space who are building clients, building solutions. I've never seen so much energy in a protocol before. I mean, Bitcoin was cool, but like this is insane. So the amount of energy in this space, and I just want to say, if you're on the fence, if you're new to Nostr, like this is the time to get in. It's only like year 2 or 3 or 4. It's still very early days, but we're building this shit, and this is it. Like this is our one chance of doing it. So yeah, we need your help, and come join join the fun.
It is fun.
I mean, I can't leave it better than that. It's guys, I think Nostr is rising. And, we're going to kill it, and we're going to make a lot of people free, even if they don't want to be. And I can't ask for more. Listen, thank you so much for giving your time, your effort, and grinding on this. We're going to make it.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. For more resources, check the show notes. We put a lot of effort into them. And remember, we don't have a crystal ball, so let us know about your project. Visit bitcoin.review to find out how to get in touch.